Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences. Today, I'm authorizing additional strong sanctions and new limitations on what can be exported to Russia. This is going to impose severe cost on the Russian economy, both immediately and over time. We have purposely designed these sanctions to maximize the long-term impact on Russia and to minimize the impact on the United States and our allies. We're going to impose major, and we're going to impair their ability to compete in high-tech 21st century economy. We've already seen the impact of our actions on Russia's currency and the ruble, which early today hit its weakest level ever in history.
In this committee before, our sanctions policy in Russia has been a complete and total failure. We thought that we would shrink the Russian economy by 10, 20, 30, even 50%, yet we've shrunk the Russian economy by very little.
You know, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the U.S. political leadership. As soon as the political leadership decided to use the U.S. dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to this American power. I would not like to use any strong language, but it is a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake. Why did the United States do this? My only guess is self-conceit. They probably thought it would lead to full collapse, but nothing collapsed.
Okay, so story number 2 from the Tucker Carlson Putin interview. You know the story that broke the internet, the interview that had people in the West furious, the left, the media who are jealous and hating on Tucker Carlson, complete outrage because they can't get an interview with Putin. They wish Putin would sit down for 2 hours and talk to them, but he won't, because all they're going to do is try to argue with him, just like when Trump does an interview. Anytime he does an interview, they sit there and constantly interrupt him and try to debate him with left-wing talking points. So that's why they would never get the interview, because he doesn't want to hear any of that crap and he doesn't have time for it. But another thing that Putin talked about was BRICS, the BRICS alliance, the dollar, and U.S. global hegemony. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to look at a couple of clips, and we're going to look at a story about what's going on over there with U.S. armed forces in the Pacific near China. It looks like the U.S. is trying to provoke China into maybe a hot war, turn this Cold War into a hot war. I know the neocons in DC will love this. I know all of these China-hating, these Sinophobes in the U.S., these people who would love to give money to the military-industrial complex, print trillions or more dollars, stack it on top of the debt, but they're going to get paid. So I know they would love something like that. So we're going to talk about what's going on over there. We're going to look at an article shortly. But first, we're going to talk about BRICS. We're going to talk about the dollar. So nations worldwide are starting to decouple from the dollar. The U.S. has been trying to get countries, its allies and smaller countries that it can bully, it's been trying to get these countries to decouple away from China, from Chinese currency, from Chinese products, from Chinese technology. But these countries are starting to move away from the dollar. But the media doesn't talk about this. This is why so many Americans are living in blissful ignorance, because they have no idea of why inflation is going up and why we are on the edge of a cliff of hyperinflation, or if not hyperinflation, something very terrible, a financial crisis. So the biggest way that this is being done, these countries are decoupling away from the dollars. These countries are starting to move away from being under the U.S. as a boot, is BRICS. So what exactly is BRICS? BRICS is an acronym. It stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America. It's a group of nations that work together on financial prosperity and joint military cooperation. So they're expanding trade, they're increasing their security, and they're moving away from the US dollar. And as Putin said, the dollar is the main weapon that the United States uses against its enemy countries. Any country that it feels it needs to inflict some type of penalty on. It's not military might, it's the dollar. So BRICS is 10 countries now. It started off with 4 countries, and then they quickly admitted South America became a 5-country group. but now you got 10 countries encompassing nearly half of the world population, and dozens more countries are begging to join. Let us in. We want to be part of this exclusive club. Russia is about to give a presentation. They're about to lead a conference of 159 countries and talk about BRICS, the pros and cons of BRICS, and let these countries decide for themselves. But most of these countries are going to want to join BRICS, or they're going to want to develop close ties with BRICS as some type of BRICS secondary countries. But you have U.S. allies. You have Saudi Arabia. They're already a part of BRICS. The oil behemoth Saudi Arabia, the one that U.S. has been giving billions of dollars to, talking about we're going to protect you from Iran and all of that. They joined BRICS. Looks like Iran is probably going to join. So even though U.S. has been spending money and trying to coerce these countries in certain ways, they're joining the group that Russia formed because the BRICS organization was originally conceived by Russians. But you got the UAE over there, another oil behemoth. These guys are allied under Russia and China's umbrella. And you have a few other nations that make up the full 10. The chairmanship rotates from country to country every year, so it's not just one country dictating like in NATO, even though NATO is more of a treaty form organization where it's more of a contractual alliance. And the BRICS nations aren't tied on that level, but U.S. basically runs NATO. However, in BRICS, the chairmanship, the leadership rotates every year, and this year Russia holds the chairmanship. So they get to set the key objectives and the priorities for BRICS. So this is an excerpt released by the Russians on what they're looking at doing. In general, Russia will continue to promote all aspects of BRICS partnership in three key aspects, including politics and security, economy and finance, and culture and humanitarian contact, Putin said. Putin stated that Russia's priorities include promoting cooperation in science, high technology, healthcare, environmental protection, culture, sports, youth changes, and civil society. So when these countries, as they develop their technology, as they get advancements and maybe some type of STEM related computing type field, medical advancement, military technology, they share it among themselves with the other BRICS members. They're doing military joint exercise. They're about to do a naval exercise over there in the Middle East. So these countries are working together in all types of aspects, and it's a threat to the global world order, the U.S.-led order, as it's been for the last few decades. And this is why the United States has a major problem with this. And one thing that the United States has been doing to try to slow down the growth of these nations like Russia, mainly China, is using the dollars. And what I mean when I say using the dollar, they weaponize it. So a lot of countries around the world are worried about the dollar because you got sanctions everywhere. Anytime the United States has an issue with some country, oh, we're going to sanction you. We're going to sanction people, the elites, quote unquote, elites in your country. We're going to sanction the country itself. We're going to slap tariffs on trade. So you got sanctions all over Asia. You got them in Eastern Europe. You got them in South America. We got them in Africa. So all types of sanctions. When a country decides for itself on what it wants to do, like I think it was Uganda when they decided we're going to outlaw gay marriage. The United States said, you know what? We don't like that your citizens want this. So how about we sanction the entire country? So they're weaponizing the dollar anytime they don't agree with something. Blackmailing smaller countries to do the things that they want them to do. Look, you're going to pass laws that we want you to do. You're going to have a cultural society that we want. You are even going to grow crops. You look in Central America. You look in South America. These countries have to grow a certain product, certain crop in farming, because the U.S. wants them to grow it, because it benefits the United States. So if you don't grow this, how about we sanction you? So a lot of these countries are worried, look, we can't have U.S. holding global hegemony because all of us are using a dollar in third-party trading, and the United States is going to take advantage of that and sanction us. And the United States also is quick to seize assets from a country. If you have money tied up with the United States, they'll take it. Just like that $300 billion that they have from Russia, they seized from Russia, talking about giving it to Ukraine. So bottom line is, many of these countries, most countries are worried about this because they see that the United States is extremely aggressive when it comes to weaponizing the dollar. But soon the dollar won't be the dominant reserve currency. Let's look at what Putin had to say in this interview with Tucker Carlson. He talked about how weaponizing the dollar is a bad idea. He talked about how these sanctions that the U.S. slapped on Russia, talked all this crap about, oh, we're going to bankrupt Russia. We're going to send them back to the Stone Ages with sanctions. Putin talked about how these sanctions don't even work. And then Tucker Carlson tried to be slick because he tried to create a rift between Russia and China. Aren't you worried about China? China's economy is so massive, so you're going to get under the U.S.'s boot with the dollar, but then you're going to be stuck under China's boot. Aren't you worried about that? And Putin slapped that down because he's like, yeah, that's a nonsensical point. So let's take a look at what Putin had to say.
The dollar is the cornerstone of the United States power. I think everyone understands very well that no matter how many dollars are printed, they are quickly dispersed all over the world. Inflation in the United States is minimal. It's about 3 or 3.4%, which is, I think, totally acceptable for the US. But they won't stop printing. What does the debt of $33 trillion tell us about? It is about the emission. Nevertheless, it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. China's economy has become the first economy in the world in purchasing power parity. In terms of volume, it overtook the US a long time ago. The USA comes second, then India, 1.5 billion people, and then Japan, with Russia in the 5th place. Russia was the first economy in Europe last year, despite all the sanctions and restrictions. Is it normal from your point of view? Sanctions, restrictions, impossibility of payments in dollars, being cut off from SWIFT services, sanctions against our ships carrying oil, sanctions against airplanes, sanctions in everything, everywhere. The largest number of sanctions in the world which are applied against Russia. And we have become Europe's first economy during this time. The tools that US uses don't work.
Is the BRICS, for example, in danger of being completely dominated by the Chinese economy in a way that's not good for their sovereignty? Do you worry about that?
Well, we have heard those boogeyman stories before. It is a boogeyman story. We're neighbors with China. You cannot choose neighbors just as you cannot choose close relatives. We share a border of 1,000 kilometers with them. This is number one. Second, we have a centuries-long history of coexistence. We're used to it. Third, China's foreign policy philosophy is not aggressive. Its idea is to always look for compromise, and we can see that. The next point is as follows. We are always told the same boogeyman story, and here it goes again, through an euphemistic form, but it is still the same boogeyman story.
You've never explained why you think that happened, except to say that the West fears a strong Russia, but we have a strong China the West does not seem very afraid of. What about Russia, do you think, convinced policymakers they had to take it down?
Запад боится сильного Китая больше, чем сильной России.
The West is afraid of strong China more than it fears a strong Russia, because Russia has 150 million people and China has 1.5 billion population, and its economy is growing by leaps and bounds, or 5% a year. It used to be even more. But that's enough for China. As Bismarck once put it, potentials are the most important. China's potential is enormous. It is the biggest economy in the world today in terms of purchasing power parity and the size of the economy. It has already overtaken the United States quite a long time ago, and it is growing at a rapid clip. Let's not talk about who is afraid of whom. Let's not reason in such terms.
So yeah, you heard it from the man himself. They're not worried about sanctions. And here's the thing about sanctions. You have to be arrogant as hell to sit there and believe that sanctioning these large countries is actually going to be effective, because basically you're saying, okay, Russia, you are a country of 150 million people, but we're going to cut you off. We're going to stop trading coffee and whatever other type of product with you. And we're so arrogant and cocky, we believe the only way you can get these products is through us. So you guys are too damn stupid to be able to create your own products. So since we're going to sanction you and cut you off from this, you're not going to know what to do. We have this SWIFT banking system. We conduct financial transactions through this system, and if we cut you off, you're just going to be asked out because you're too dumb to create your own system and partner with nations outside of that. Is that what the United States believe? They cut China off from advanced technology because they're extremely worried about China, especially China's advancement in computing when it comes to microchips, when it comes to AI. They're extremely worried. So we saw what happened with Huawei, how the U.S. banned that and started saying, oh yeah, they're putting spyware inside the phones. I don't know anything about that, but they cut them off from the microchips and said, look, you're a country of 1.5 billion people. You have 10 times more STEM graduates than we do. You guys are extremely intelligent, but we're so arrogant and cocky. We're going to cut you off from advanced technology, from microchips. We're going to try to pressure Taiwan and the Europeans from working with you on this, even though Taiwan is working with China still. We're going to cut you off from this, and we're going to say you're too stupid to develop your own microchips and technology. That's arrogant. Sanctions come from arrogance. You believe that you cut these people off, they're too dumb to develop their own. Well, it looks like the Chinese are doing just fine when it comes to microchips, with other traded goods, even with the tariffs that the U.S. slaps on China when their goods are shipped to the United States. It seems like they're doing well. But it is backfiring. These sanctions do backfire heavily against American companies like Intel and other countries that need to bring products, farmers who need to bring products in from China, companies that need to bring oil and other products in from Russia. They're facing increased costs. So United States sanctions are hurting the U.S. companies more than it's hurting the other countries. In fact, it's doing good for the other countries because you have people in Russia saying, thank you, Joe Biden, for the sanctions. Thank you for cutting us off from SWIFT and from Western Europe, because now we develop our own stuff and we're more independent now. That's why I said from the beginning, all these companies talking about, oh, we're going to be Russia-phobic, McDonald's and Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts and all these other big countries, YouTube, talking about, oh, we're not going to pay Russian YouTubers. They said, okay, go ahead. We're going to be more independent and develop our country outside of American companies, outside American technology. That's why it was a bad idea from the beginning. So the Chinese boogeyman narrative, that whole thing, trying to scare Russia away from China, not going to work. Even Vivek, as much as I like him talking about he's going to create a wedge between Russia and China, they're getting too close. Not going to work. Just not going to happen. What's going to happen is the United States is constantly printing these dollars, and what the U.S. does as it prints this money, it doesn't go into hyperinflation, and we don't fall off a cliff because the United States spreads the dollar throughout the world. All these countries use the dollar in their own transactions. But as countries start getting rid of the dollar, even Europeans and U.S. allies, as they start getting rid of the dollar, it's going to create more inflation in the U.S. And we got bank execs. We got like CEOs like Jamie Dimon and Brian Moynihan. I think they're from Chase and Bank of America. They're talking about, this is bad, man. All of this debt that we're racking up, we're constantly printing more money, and more countries in the world are starting to move away from the dollar. The United States is about to fall into a deep recession or something worse. Let's take a look at Jamie Dimon talking a little bit about this debt.
It's going to come to bite. You know, that could be in 3 years or 5 years or 7 years. I think it may very well bite in the markets way before that, because the market makers don't have because of regulations, don't have the capability to make markets like you used to. So we can easily handle it, but we're restricted by all these rules. And you're absolutely correct. If my numbers are right, in 1980, debt to GDP was 35%. We spent 5% of the deficit because of recession. Now debt to GDP is 100%. The deficit's 6%, and it's in a boom time. And of course, it feels pretty good because we spend all that money. It seems to be working. I think governments are starting to feel omnipotent, and central banks, I'd be much more cautious about that.
So like I said, the United States suppresses its own inflation by pushing the dollar throughout the world, by expanding the amount of people. You got 300-some million people in the U.S., but you have billions of people using the dollar. And as that amount of people shrinks, we're going to fall into financial crisis. And Diamond calls BRICS, this organization that is designed to decouple, to get away from being under the U.S.'s boot. This organization, he called it the beginning of a global market rebellion, basically saying that more and more countries are going to join and start doing business with the BRICS nation using Russian currency and Chinese currency, and probably even their own currency as the main currency for global trading. And it's going to cause problems in the United States. It's going to cause more inflation, financial crisis in the United States. So like I said earlier, BRICS started under Russia. All these other countries, they're cooperating. And Russia is building I think they've already built it, a reserve to SWIFT. So they're saying, look, we don't need U.S. permission to do business. We're not stupid. We're not dumb. We know how to survive and do trade on our own. And there's not going to be any U.S. dollar integration in this new banking system. Russia literally has countries lined up to join in. So as much as they like to call Russia the aggressor, these countries are more afraid of the U.S. because the U.S. is extremely aggressive in using the dollar to blackmail countries to do on their bidding, to coerce people, and to sanction people if the United States doesn't like how they're living or what they're doing. Even allies are looking to dump the dollar. Western European, these U.S. flunkies, these vassal states, they're trying to get away from it. We're going to look at a political excerpt here, talking about the French president, Emmanuel Macron, something that he talked about. He was over there in Asia, and let's look at an excerpt from it. Macron also argued that Europe has increased its dependency on the U.S. for weapons and energy and must now focus on boosting European defense industries. He also suggested Europe should reduce its dependence on the extraterritoriality of the U.S. dollar, a key policy objective of both Moscow and Beijing. If the tension between the two superpowers heat up, we won't have the time nor the resources to finance our strategic autonomy and will become vassals, he said. Russia, China, Iran, and other countries have been hit by U.S. sanctions in the recent years that are based on denying access to dominant dollar-dominated global financial system. Some in Europe have complained about weaponization of the dollar by Washington, which forces European countries to give up businesses and cut ties with third countries or face crippling sanctions. So when the United States slapped all those sanctions on Russia, talking all that crap, the EU had to follow suit, and the EU didn't want to. Like, for example, Germany with Nord Stream, with the gas. The U.S., look, take this more expensive liquefied gas that we're going to ship to you. We don't want you doing trade with Russia. Russia has all these food, all this wheat over there. We don't want you guys doing all this trading with Russia because Russia is the enemy. So these European flunkies have to follow the U.S. into these policies, and it's hurting them. That's why France is saying, look, man, we can't be under the dollar. We need to be more independent. He wants the EU to form together and make its own superpower outside of the U.S. because it's extremely dangerous to constantly be caught up with the U.S. The U.S. is trying to start stuff with China over there with Taiwan, and he's saying we can't get caught up in that because if some type of war breaks out, if the U.S. sanctions China saying you can't buy this and that from China, guess what? The EU is going to have to follow suit, and it's going to further cripple the market, the economies of these European countries, and they don't want anything to do with it. So they're trying to get away from the U.S.'s dollar. These are the supposed allies, which I call vassal states. Bottom line is, U.S. can't stop this movement, this global financial power that's starting outside the U.S. dollar, the growth of the Chinese market, the power of the Chinese. The U.S. has been trying its best to suppress them. Let's look at this encirclement map here. Look how aggressive the U.S. is against China. They've got all types of air bases, naval bases around. They got special forces over there, and we're about to get into that. We're going to look at this article here, talking about special forces right off the shore where you can literally look and see the Chinese mainland. You got U.S. spec ops right there, allegedly training Taiwanese people. And most of the world, this area where the U.S. spec ops are, most of the world says this is definitely Chinese territory. And I'm going to show you a map in a second. But the U.S. knows that it can't stop the rise of the Chinese market, the Chinese economy, and China has all these partners, the global south, and they've outgrown the G7, and they're growing much faster than the EU and the United States. So what's the solution? War. The U.S. wants a war. Like I was saying earlier in the video, these neocons are itching for war with China. So let's look at this article here. U.S. Army Special Forces train Taiwan troops near China's coast. Specialists from the U.S. Army are training Taiwanese soldiers in what is described as a permanent arrangement rather than on a rotational basis, including on an island just 6 miles from the Chinese coast, according to a local newspaper. Okay, so you got the Green Berets, you got these spec op forces over there, basically in China. Like I said, most of the world says that it's China. So we're going to look at Google Maps here. We're going to zoom out. We're going to go over here to see where exactly are these armed U.S. military forces allegedly training the Taiwanese. So we got China right here, we got Taiwan right here. So let's zoom in to see where the hell are these guys. This is where they are. Cayman Island right here, the Cayman Islands, this island right here, somewhere over here. So look at this, man. Taiwan is over here. Apparently they're over here too, but the big problem is they're right here. This is basically in China. Like I keep saying, most of the world recognizes this as China. Look at this. If you're over here, you can look, you live in a house over here, you can look out your window and see this island. It's that close. It's 6 miles off the Chinese coast. In fact, when I zoom out too much, you can't even see where it is. Look, it's part of China. Look at this. In fact, I'm going to show you some U.S. islands just to give you some perspective of how close this thing is. And U.S. is claiming that it's not Chinese territory. So let's look at L.A. right here. So you got Catalina, very popular island over there off the coast of L.A. This thing is 22 miles off the coast. So that island, that Chinese island or Taiwanese island, however you want to recognize it, is much, much closer to the mainland than this island is to LA. Or even more popular islands, more well-known islands like over here. Got Key West, Key Largo, in the Florida Keys. This island in China is closer than these are to Florida. Or let's look at this one here. This is Obama's playground. You know, he has that $12-15 million mansion up there, over there in Martha's Vineyard, where a bunch of rich Democrats live. So, again, it's off the coast of Rhode Island, Massachusetts. That Chinese island is closer to China than these islands are to the U.S. But the U.S. is saying, nah, this isn't your territory. We have the right to send armed military forces to this island, which you can look out your window and see. So we're going to dare you to do something about it. Taiwan's United Daily News reported on Sunday that the training regimens were being planned and supervised by the 1st Special Forces Group, an airborne unit under the provisions of last year's National Defense Authorization Act, which was signed into law in December 2022. China claims Taiwan as its own, but the Communist Party in Beijing has never ruled the island since seizing power in 1949. Taipei is the capital of Taiwan. Taipei rejects the sovereignty claims and for decades has relied on the United States for weapons and training as well as international support. God, wait, another thing I'm just observing here. How many countries are we going to send money and weapons to? Like, damn. Can we put America first? Because in my next video, I'm going to talk about the United States sending money, so I'm not going to get too much into that. United States sending money to other countries, something that just happened in a sit-in, as well as international support despite Washington's decision to break off former diplomatic relations in 1979 because the United States was worried about a war with China at the time. That U.S. service members were training Taiwan's armed forces became a years-long open secret that was not officially acknowledged until 2021 when President Tsai Ing-wen said a few American instructors were on the island for occasional training programs. Just like they're over there training the Ukrainians and training the Israelis. Yeah, okay, whatever. The NDAA for 2023, however, opened the door to more robust cooperation between the two security partners. Taiwan's defense ministry did not comment on the report, but said all foreign military exchanges are conducted according to an annual plan. So here's another picture. This island is right here in China, basically. Look at this, man. It's in the Chinese harbor. U.S. Defense Department spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Martin Myers had no comment on specific training, but said, I would highlight that our support for and defense relations with Taiwan remain aligned against the current threat opposed by the People's Republic of China. PR, that's a PR statement. Yeah, we're just over here because China's aggressive and evil, and we're just over here with our partners, just training, you know. It's not provocation. It's not provocation to send armed military forces 6 miles off the coast of another major power. Not provocation. Just training. The UDN newspaper said Army Green Berets of the 1st Special Forces Group are this year permanently stationed at 2 bases of the 101st Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion, a Chinese Army Special Operations Force. The instructors were sent to the Pinggu or Pescadores Islands closer to Taiwan proper, but also to Cayman a group of islands visible from the port city of Xiamen in eastern China on the Chinese side of the Taiwan Strait, the support said. Yeah, hey, pure provocation. Looks like the U.S. is worried about rising China. It looks like the U.S. is worried that they can't stop it, because you can look at raw GDP numbers. Say, no, the United States is number one, but when it comes to spending power, when it comes to potential with 1.5 billion people, yeah, it looks like China is the strongest economy in the world. And another major aspect of this economy is the production capability, because these U.S. companies for decades have shipped all of their infrastructure, all of their production, manufacturing off shores to China, to Vietnam, places like that. So the production capability in the United States when it comes to manufacturing goods and products that people need and military equipment is not there. It's weak, and China has an enormous production capability right now. It will take the United States a long time, but they're not even going to try to catch up in that aspect, because they're going to mess with profit margins. These companies' profit margins are set to where they manufacture and build in China. But let me know what you guys think about this. Leave me your thoughts below. Share the video. Thanks for watching.